Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast today. We're excited to be joined by Ben Channon. He's a specialist in designing healthy buildings. He's an architect, author and TEDx speaker, director at a design for wellbeing consultancy called Ekkist. Ben's interest in designing for mental well-being was born out of his own issues with burnout and anxiety in his 20s, which led him to write two books: The Relationship Between Architecture and Happiness, Happy by Design, and the Happy Design Toolkit, which we will be talking about in a bit. But biophilic design obviously links design, environment, and well-being, and which is why I'm really delighted to welcome you, Ben, to this podcast. So thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Ness. Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. Well, can you start by telling us a bit about what you do and what Ekkist does, if that's all right, please?
Sure. Well, I think you did cover quite a lot of it in your lovely introduction. But yeah, just to summarize, as you said, I began my career as an architect. I was actually working for a large residential architect doing really big kind of apartment buildings, often like large master plans and things as well. Um, but I gradually became more interested in that health and well-being side of things, which led me to Ekkist. And Ekkist are they were the UK's first specialist health and well-being consultancy for the built environment. So what that effectively means is we purely focus on health outcomes in the built environment. So that's obviously supporting our clients in creating healthier buildings, maybe as well looking at their kind of policies, their strategies, their approaches, helping them to maybe update their ESG strategies as well, so that really everything our clients do is hopefully aligned towards creating healthier buildings and better places.
That sounds fantastic. I didn't realize that they were one of the first, actually.
There's a lot of companies out there who they're doing, sort of a mix of things, multidisciplinary, doing
Yeah.
sustainability with and a bit of well-being, and those sorts of things too. But in terms of certainly being purely health focused, yeah, I believe we were the first one.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Well, you've done some really great projects, and I'll put links on the spiel that goes with the podcast here. But can you tell us what got you into this sort of health and well-being, and how did you start connecting the dots between, our buildings and the environment and sort of the impact on our health and well-being?
Yeah, well, again, to go back to your intro again, obviously for me it was a very personal thing because I did have these issues with burnout and then unfortunately with anxiety in my mid-20s. And obviously I was designing buildings, particularly homes for people every single day. I was going into work really. And I started to think about the way that actually my own environment was impacting my mental health. At the time I was living in a sort of shared young professionals house really. I think there's five or six of us living in one terraced house, and to be honest it wasn't really much different to student life. And the kitchen was constantly a mess. I don't know if we ever really opened the curtains. And all these things, they're cumulative, they add up, and they do have a negative impact on your mental health and on how you feel, even on your sort of sense of self-image as well, I think, really. And well, the research tells us that now that that's definitely true. So I became interested in that, and I'd heard a bit about this idea of phenomenology at university, the idea that sort of we feel differently in different places, and I began to research that. And I sort of unearthed all of this amazing research that was coming out of environmental psychology, which was, basically showing that the environment in which we spend time has a huge impact on not just how we feel, but how we think, how we behave, how we interact with other people, even sort of the choices we make, whether we're making healthy or unhealthy choices too. So, yeah, that then really began to fascinate me, and that then led into initially a kind of design guide for the architectural practice I was working at. I thought, I wonder if I could write a bit of a guide that would be helpful to the other architects here in creating healthier places. And that then sort of snowballed. And I thought, actually, there's enough here to write a book, and sort of the rest is history, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, maybe actually we can sort of jump around a little bit, but can we talk a little bit about the books actually? Because it seems
Of
like
course.
a good place to talk about those. Obviously, Happy by Design and the Happy Design Toolkit. Obviously, toolkit sounds like it exactly what it is on the tin. Is that what it is, or?
Yeah, basically, so Happy by Design was the first book, and it's a little bit more, yeah, it's a bit more pocket sized. I think it's still 200 odd pages, but it's much more about it. For me, it was about trying to get my own head around these concepts and principles, really. So it kind of reads like that, and it's about trying to then communicate those principles and concepts to designers, to developers, to even members of the public who might be interested in making changes, say, to their own home or their own workplace. Um, so yeah, it was really me trying to summarize what are the key ideas, what are the key things that improve and support our health, and particularly our mental health in design. And how can we break those down into the sort of constituent parts? And then the Happy Design Toolkit was really in response to I had quite a lot of people read the first book and say, this is great, but do you have any good physical built examples of this? Or what does this look like? How can we integrate this into our schemes? And so actually the toolkit is, as you said, it's almost a kit of parts. It's ideas, it's elements, it's things that we can all integrate into our built projects to effectively make them better for mental health and for occupant and well-being happiness.
Can you give us like a couple of examples? I'm sort of curious. Like, are there some things that you think these could be implemented anywhere? This is like the standard, the bog standard thing that you should be doing. I mean, obviously lighting and sound and things, but I mean, could you give us maybe a couple of examples of like best practice? So if someone's listening to this, they could take away a couple of things.
Sure. So, in terms of the headings, yeah, you mentioned a few of them there. They're kind of the main concepts or chapters. Obviously, we do look at lights and nature, biophilia, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about in a minute. But also things like giving people more control. So some basic rules of thumb around effectively, we know that when we give people greater autonomy, greater control, as a rule, they tend to be happier. There is a slight thing to be aware of here, which is that when we give people too much choice, actually, there's this thing called choice paralysis, which is a different conversation, but actually that can be a bit overwhelming for people. But generally, more control is better. And we even seeing we see that trickle down as well. It doesn't just apply to kind of general design, but also when we're thinking about kind of designing for people with a range of needs. So actually, when you're looking at people with certain neurodiversities and things like that, again, choice and control really important for those sort of groups. And then we've also got things like comfort and materials. So again, making sure people are physically comfortable in spaces, but also psychologically comfortable. Do they feel safe? Do they feel at peace? Are they going to be disturbed? All these sorts of things. And again, that all links back to control and choice too. And then coming through to things like social aspects. So how can we design buildings that make people more social, interact more? Because we know, again, chronic loneliness or isolation are really some of the worst things for both our mental and our physical health, and even our life expectancy. And similarly, movement. We know. I heard recently the average British person spends more time sitting on the toilet every week than they do exercising. So can we design buildings and cities and places that actually get us active, maybe get us off the sofa, get us off the toilet, get us moving, and because we all know the benefits that can have for our physical and our mental health.
Yeah, exactly. I quite like that. I like the fact that we spend more time on the loo. I can believe it as well, actually. Yeah, kind of we leave such a
Yeah, I can
sort of
see it left you a bit gobsmacked there.
yeah, yeah, but it leaves us such a we lead such a sedentary life, don't we? And if we can create spaces, particularly in the workplace, where and schools actually, which can encourage kids and but also people in the workplace to move around. I've seen some really great things with like things going up the stairs with like so you have to walk up the stairs in order to read the whole thing, or do you know what I mean? Or the pathway takes you up there from an environmental psychology point of view, the light at the end of the tunnel
Exactly.
kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of this comes back to that idea of nudge psychology as well. Can we design things that just gently push people, gently encourage people to, as you say, take the stairs rather than the lift, or
Mm.
to jump on their bike rather than jump in their car. All of these sorts of things, we can achieve that whether it's in the workplace, in the home, as you say, schools, public buildings. There's so many opportunities for this sort of nudge psychology to just encourage people to make slightly better choices because we know as well we're all quite bad at it. We've all had that feeling of like, oh, I know I was going to go out for a run tonight, or I was going to go to the gym tonight, but actually, oh, I could just put my pajamas on and get in front of the telly. And we are naturally all quite or most of us at any rate, quite easily swayed to the kind of energy saving choice. So
Yeah.
we just sometimes need that nudge and that encouragement, really.
Yeah, I find that really interesting what you were saying about zoning. And for me, biophilic design embraces this whole creating spaces for people, these little nooks. The prospect and refuge, I think, is one of the things people, when we talk about biophilic design, it's always plants, or they might think about light and air and all this kind of thing, but they forget about creating these nooks, this prospects and refuge, places where we can sit with our back against the wall, feeling secure and held and safe, but also looking out, managing, being able to see what's going on. Obviously, like this whole predatory thing, is anything going to come and eat me? And the sort of neurodiversity aspect as well is really, really important. And one of our recent issues was focused on biophilic design and neurodiversity. Some really, really interesting articles on the science, and all loads and loads of research as well. But for you, how do you see sort of inclusive design, biophilic design? How do you see it all kind of like melding together and creating spaces that are better for mental health and for people who might be on who might sort of align with it with a different mind?
Yeah, well, I think inclusive design, creating inclusive environments is enormously important. It's definitely something that is being talked about more. I think historically, unfortunately, it's been underrepresented and under-considered generally in design. We do have, sadly, not just in the UK, but most of the world, we've got a bit of a history of sort of white men designing everything, and that's historically not actually led to the greatest or the most inclusive environments. But I'm a really strong believer that we need diverse design teams because we want to get that diverse range of experiences, but we need to be thinking about a really diverse range of end users too, and that does mean considering physical accessibility needs, obviously, as you mentioned, things like neurodiversity, but also issues around things like gender, class, politics, all those different backgrounds that people come from. We need to be considering all of it, and my fundamental belief is actually if we're creating healthier, better quality places that support people of all needs, actually everyone wins. Everyone benefits from that, right? So that really, for me, that should be the fundamental approach that we're taking. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. When you look into the research, say if we look into neurodiversity, if we look into things like autism, actually we see that things like biophilia have hugely positive impacts for people with, as you say, with different neurodiversity needs. So definitely something we should all be embracing and bringing into all of our projects more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say, talking about the workplace, I mean, we first met when I was chairing your absolutely brilliant talk at Future Build this year, where you were presenting your research and advice on creating workplaces that were not only healthy but also entice people back to the workplace, and also companies that were aiming to reach ESG targets and all this kind of thing. Obviously, Biophilic Design helps all that. For you, we've started touching already on how biophilic design fits into this big picture. But what does it mean to you? What does biophilic design mean to you? And how does it fit into workplace design?
Well, and firstly, I feel like I should caveat all this by saying I'm very aware of who I'm talking to and probably your audience, many of whom probably know more about biophilic design than I do. But certainly for me, obviously, I'm coming at it through a well-being lens and okay, how can it benefit people's overall health, but also performance? And to me, that's really interesting too, the way that we see biophilia. Um, creating whether it's improved staff productivity, reduced staff turnover, reduced absenteeism levels, all of these things. And to me, that's all absolutely fascinating. And as I'm sure, again, you and all your listeners will know, it's all connected back to things like our parasympathetic nervous system and the fact that we've really evolved to need to be around nature. But for me, I think one of the biggest misnomers that I see, again, coming from architecture, can only really speak from my own experience and story, but I definitely have seen a bit of a trend with architects just looking at biophilia kind of as green stuff. They just think it's green stuff, it's trees and it's plants, and let's just put a green wall in, let's put loads of trees in, and that's kind of job done. But of course, as you know, biophilia is so much more complex than that. It's so much deeper than that. We're looking at everything from materiality, inclusion of water, biodiversity, even things like the sort of non-rhythmic stimuli, movement of wind through a space, changing of movement of light through a space, and all of these different elements. So for me, the biggest, I think, misnomer about biophilic design is that it's this simple greenery stuff. No, it's much, much more than that, and we need to just be considering almost every aspect of nature and the natural world. Of course, my view is it all kind of links back to our evolution. As I said, the fact that we evolved as part of nature, and fundamentally, we are still, we're Homo sapiens. We're I can't remember what it is, but it's 99 point something percent genetically identical to chimps and to a lot of kind of apes and things. So. We're really not that different to a lot of other animals, and yet we often separate ourselves. We put ourselves in this silo. We see that nature is something we go and maybe interact with when we choose, maybe at the weekend or on holiday. But otherwise, we kind of lock ourselves away in these often quite kind of isolating buildings that detach us from nature. And I think maybe we need to revisit that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to talk about healthcare in a bit, but I think that's so important. This whole concept and how we get this over the line. And it's still, there's still people with blockers not getting the fact that we are nature, we are part of it. We need to, smell it, see it, feel the temperature change, feel the light change, see it, experience it. I mean, we always talk about when you go on holiday, you always choose the room that's facing the sea. You want to be out in nature. And
Yeah.
um I mean, and we are obviously in a mental health crisis right now. We still are. I mean, it was the sort of highlights a few years ago when it all sort of hit the headlines. And obviously, the role that design can really take in the built environment to enhance and improve mental health and sort of well-being. I mean, this is kind of like a massive question, but what, I mean, in a nutshell, ta-da, the 1001 question, ta-da, should you choose to reply, what role do you think design can really play in making a really, really positive impact on the mental health and well-being of like staff, children, families, even, in the home as well? What do you think?
Well, it would be terrible now if I turn around and said to you, I don't think it makes any difference at all, wouldn't it? No, the simple answer, the simple answer is, as you would probably expect from me. But yeah, the built environment where we spend time has been fundamentally demonstrated. Many, 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 many studies in lots of different areas have proven that the types of spaces we spend time in have an impact on our how we feel, on our moods, on our, as I said, our choices, our behaviors, and overall, therefore, on our mental health. So even if we just take a really simple thing like sleep, if we say, can the environment, a design of environment, improve our sleep? Well, yes, we know fundamentally, of course, it can. We know just simple things like blackout blinds, better acoustic insulation, those sorts of things, even kind of the quality and the design of the bed that we're sleeping in. This can have a huge impact on our sleep quality. And what's one of the most important things to good mental health? Good sleep. So, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, design can definitely have a massive impact on our physical and our mental health. Um, but I think the point that I often sometimes have to make and reiterate is that it's not a magic cure, and I definitely don't want people to be getting the impression that I'm coming out and saying, good architecture and good design can cure people of severe or serious mental health conditions. That would be me having a bit of a, classic architect with a messiah complex. I can fix all of the world's problems, and I'm not saying that at all. But the way I often describe it to people is that everyone's mental health kind of changes every day. Some days you might wake up, if we've got a scale from 0 to 100, one day you might be an 80, and then you might have a particularly bad week, get some bad news or something like that. The next week you might wake up on a Monday morning and think, oh, I'm a 40 actually today. And that can happen, and that's totally normal. But generally, like most things in life, it's distributed on a bell curve. So the majority of us are, somewhere around the middle. On a better day, maybe we're around a 60, on a worse day, around a 40. But on a really, really great day, everything, the stars align, everything's going brilliantly for us. We get some great news. We could get right up into the 90s. So for me, fundamentally, the way I look at it is that the built environment just provides an opportunity to just boost everyone a few percentage points in the right direction. And basically, if we can shift the average from 50 all of a sudden up to 55 or 60, then when you think about the cumulative impact that would have across a whole population, that's absolutely enormous, especially because we know things like kindness is infectious. When you're nicer to other people, they tend to then be nicer to someone else, and it spreads almost like a positive virus. And similarly, negative behavior, when someone is rude to you, that statistics show you're much more likely to then be rude and nasty to somebody else. And actually, we know that rudeness, being nasty, is much more draining than being positive and happy. So again, the potential knock-on impacts of just having a better built environment are absolutely enormous.
Yeah, that's true. And the whole sort of thing about negativity, you can have like 9 really positive things that happen to you, or like some amazing comments about your work, about how you look, or about, just about positive things about yourself. You have one negative thing, and that's the thing we focus on. It's just how our brains are, isn't it? It's like, it's almost like it's a threat, or it sort of triggers our fear reaction, I think, doesn't it? It does something.
Yeah, yeah. So again, having done a bit of reading on this, I'm not an expert, I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but from what I have read, this is all largely based on around the fact that we basically evolved to as a survival mechanism to remember negative experiences more strongly, because yes, it's very lovely having sitting around, say if you're a sort of caveman cavewoman, it's lovely sitting around a fire with your family telling stories about the day. That's a perfectly pleasant memory. But then the next day, if a red and black snake bites someone in your tribe and they get really ill, you're going to remember red and black snakes are dangerous. You're never going to forget that red and black snake. And we needed to learn that and remember that to survive. So unfortunately, it's absolutely right. And we've probably all been there, maybe with a colleague or a family member. And as you say, you give them 4 or 5 pieces of really great positive feedback, and then one tiny maybe criticism or area for improvement, and people take it negatively. That unfortunately is just the way. And it's the same with buildings, and I think actually that's again a good justification for us as designers to say, let's fill our buildings with joy, let's give people more positive memories, because we know we need to give them more positive experiences to kind of override the negative ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of going back to the healthcare, I mean, it's the whole reason I set this journal up and started researching biophilic design, because I was witnessing firsthand in a hospital environment, my dad's, my mum, just it was awful. It was really like horrendous.
Mm.
And then fast forward a few years, and then last year my mum passed away. But I spent, they said she's got hours to live. I mean, she ended up lasting 5 days. But
Hmm.
I spent that time beside her bed, and um it was unforgiving. The noise, the light, it was just all this. I mean, and there was no tunable lighting. It turned out there was, but only one person knew how to do it. It was the day before she died, and it was like, seriously. But it's like
Mm.
these are white walls. These are places more or less of torture, dare I say
Hmm.
that. And just talking about this sort of negative. Not only am I going through, and not just me, obviously, I'm just saying from my personal thing, but this is repeated over and over and over again, where you've got family members sitting around a bedside in a white
Hmm.
walled environment where there's loads of noise going on. There's no respite, there's no harmony, there's no peace, there's no beauty. And that really needs to change. Years and years and years ago, it used to be like that. You'd have like people would be dying at home, or they'd be in places where, they did have views of nature because it wasn't such a built environment. So there was that little aspect where people could get outside and stuff. But there isn't that in hospitals now. And for me, it's just so important. And just to follow on from what you're saying there about, if we can create places of joy or places of beauty and harmony that actually uplift our soul, why shouldn't it be that every single ward on a hospital be a better place for people to heal, to die, for the nurses to actually enjoy coming to work, so they don't have these mental health burnouts and the stress levels that they're under anyway. And it's not rocket science. I was interviewing the guy from the NHS, and I said, how are we going to do it? And he said, well, every time you change, you buy something, just buy better, buy different, buy circadian rhythm lighting, just buy curtains that have got pictures on. Do you know what I mean? Just think about, but it comes
Hmm.
down to
Hmm.
whoever it is who's going to take ownership of that. Sorry, I can go on and on and on because I just feel so passionate about it. It's almost so frustrating that it's not happening. I mean, it is happening in some places, of course it is, but I mean, I'd like to talk about your sort of design for well-being framework as well, which I think is really beautiful. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've kind of like rambled on there a little bit, but I don't know. I mean, what's your sort of take on hospital design? See, hospitals are workplaces ultimately as well, aren't they? So, I don't know if you have
Yeah.
any thoughts.
No, absolutely. And firstly, I'd just like to say sorry about that horrible story. It's again, I've been through a similar thing, not actually hospitals, but residential care homes that again felt very institutional, very similar. And watching my grandparents go through similar things is, yeah, it's horrible. And I'm sure it's a story that many, many, many people will relate to and can empathize with. I I wholeheartedly agree with you. No there is no reason why we can't do better. Firstly, I think we all know the reason why we aren't doing better, and it's money. Ultimately, it's people being short-sighted in terms of saying, "I'm going to save £1,000 today, even though in the long term it might cost us £10,000." And as you say, you make a small saving on some materials or choosing some cheaper furniture or whatever it might be, and as a result, it becomes a worse place for the staff to come and work. They do a worse job. It becomes a worse place for patients. So actually, they recover slower. They require more pain medication. I'm sure, again, everyone probably who has an interest in biophilia will know about Roger Ulrich's studies and the facts that when people have a view out onto nature, they are shown patients are shown to recover more quickly from operations, freeing up beds more quickly, saving hospitals money. They are shown to request less pain medication, again, saving hospitals money. So all of these things, it's about long-term thinking. It's about saying, let's plan for how can we save money over the next 10 years, 20 years, or even 50 years? But unfortunately, we have political systems that are very short-termist, and therefore everyone's about saving money in the short term. So that's probably, for me, that's probably why it's happening. And again, I would also say the other aspect is probably an education piece, the fact that a lot of people still involved in medicine. I speak to doctors and people a lot in the NHS. They're not necessarily aware of all of this information. They don't realize that the environment they're working in, the environments that patients and their families are spending time in, are having such a negative impact on their mental health. It's totally normal to them that hospitals often you can spend all day in a hospital and not see any daylight. To me, that is wild. That's absolutely incredible that we design hospitals in that way. But to them, that's become totally normal because that's what they're used to. And again, there is fascinating research out there, not just about, talked about the impact on staff, the impact on patients, but actually, as you say, even relatives and families of patients, that there's really interesting research to show that as you put more biophilia into hospitals, they do report a kind of better visitor experience. They report being able to deal with stressful and unpleasant situations, of which, of course, there are many in hospitals. That they're able to deal with those better, and they find the whole thing much less overwhelming. So, again, the arguments for it are just enormous, and it is quite mind-blowing that we don't naturally do that in hospitals. I also think we've kind of got ourselves lulled into this slight stupor of like, well, this is just the way we do it, and this is how it should be. This is how it's always been done. But that's quite unique to the UK, I think. When you travel around many other countries, let's maybe put the States to one side because their healthcare system is just absolutely crazy. But when you say you go to a lot of European or Scandinavian countries, maybe Australia, places like that, the quality of hospitals tends to be so much better. And again, it's not just white painted plasterboard everywhere. There's color, there's life, there's nature, there's views, there's daylight, and there's natural materials. We can do better, and we should do better. And I suppose, yeah, in terms of the design for well-being framework, which you mentioned, the reason we created that is because we kind of believe that these principles are able to be applied universally, whether it is to housing, whether it's to offices, to healthcare places. We know fundamentally who's using all those places. It's humans. It's humans at home. It's humans at work. It's humans in hospitals. Whatever. So we can have a positive impact on humans no matter what kind of building it is. And so the framework basically again sets out kind of key. It's human-centered ideas, things that we all need in our life. So rather than making them specific about buildings, like some certifications look at the building fabric, the building layout, all those sorts of things. The design for wellbeing framework, it's all focused on the human. So we look at things like rest, and social interaction and nutrition and toxicology and those sorts of things, and say, okay, how can we design buildings that address every single one of these headings? And so that means, we've used it, for example, we entered a competition once to design the healthiest bathroom possible, and we've used it on a master plan, which is sort of like 10, 20 urban blocks, because you can scale it and you can apply it to the person rather than the project. So yeah, that I think again, if we were to apply something like the design for wellbeing framework to the design of a new hospital, certainly would look dramatically different to most of the NHS hospitals we end up seeing here in the UK, for sure.
Wow. That design for wellbeing framework, is there a link that I can add to the spiel that goes with this podcast? Is there?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course. I'll send you a link to that.
yeah.
And people might be interested in our Healthy Homes checklist too, which is a similar thing, but we again identified there is a bit of a problem here in the UK with our housing still. We still see a lot of new housing that it's just again, it's often very small. It often
Yeah.
doesn't have enough daylight, or it overheats, or it doesn't have views onto nature. We're seeing a lot of these big homogeneous housing developments built these days where you're lucky if you get a couple of trees there, to be honest, let alone even a sort of patch of grass for kids to play on. So we definitely identified there's sort of growth and improve room for improvement there too. So I'll send over both of those, and hopefully your listeners will find those interesting.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. Thank you. That healthy home checklist is brilliant. That I think people will find that really useful, and hopefully, if we can try to infiltrate people's brains and just fire out that design for wellbeing framework wherever we can, I think that's got to be a good thing. So Ben, thank you. Before I ask you the final question, is there anything else that you would like to add in particular?
Just really again to remind people that the impact that design can have. I think most designers got into the industry because they wanted to make a positive difference. But, and I can speak from experience here, it is easy sometimes to lose track of that goal and end up, just sort of being like, okay, well, as I said, this is the way we've always done things. I know in architecture specifically, there is a real push for repetition, for doing things the same way to
Mm,
increase efficiency and stuff like that. But actually, we do need to challenge. We do need to ask questions and say, can we do this better? And definitely, I think having the facts and figures and stats at our fingertips, really helps us. So, okay, I want to make the case for more daylight, but
yeah,
how can I argue that case? Well, actually, if we know that people who have more exposure to daylight in the mornings get better sleep means better mental health and all these sorts of things, we can make that case. And certainly as well, the financial case. Biophilia is an amazing example of that. There's so many statistics out there about, if you say you look at retail, and we know that when you put more biophilia into retail spaces, actually consumers spend more money. So again, it's that capital expenditure versus operational expenditure and potential profit. If we spend a little bit more at the outset on creating much better places, actually in the long term, it will save us a lot more money. It will make our clients a lot more profit, and everyone will be happier. So yeah, we can do better, and let's go out there and do it.
yeah, absolutely. And we actually have an issue coming up on retail. It's this last issue of this year, so issue 12, can you believe it? But yeah, that's actually looking at all that stuff, not just about the design, but actually the benefits of it and how much people spend more. They linger more in the shop and they spend more. So, if we're kind of having that
Yep.
mindset when we're doing that, we should have that everywhere. So Ben, thank you. So the final question, Ben, that I ask everybody who comes on the podcast. If you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
That's a great question. For me, again, I think it goes back to this point. It's not just about slapping more trees everywhere. It's about really rethinking our whole relationship with nature and with the planet. Obviously, I'm not a sustainability expert. I'm not, I focused on human health, not planet health. But you have to be mad to ignore what's going on in the world and going on around us. For me, we have to make a move now to a real change in the way we live our lives. We have to live more in balance and in symbiosis with nature. We have to not see nature as just something we can plunder and keep taking from, but actually something that we need to support. And that actually, if we support nature, nature will support us back. And this means, making greener cities. not just, not just for the sake of the environment either, but for the sake of the residents of cities. We know that over half the people in the world now are living in urban environments. And my personal view is creating just, mile after mile of solid concrete and tarmac is not good for us. It's not good for the environment. So let's live more in balance, and let's try and create a bit more of a bit more harmony in the world.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.